Welcome to the latest of my Inside Tracks. Today I'm going to explore a mighty event in the astrological calendar. It's the Saturn Cazimi. This only occurs once a year, and this year it's on Wednesday the 12th of March at 10:28 a.m. Universal. Now, Saturn has reached 22 degrees and 5 minutes. The Cazimi is when the Sun catches up, applies to Saturn, and they are completely unified in an exact conjunction. The power and resonance of the Sun glows up the essential energy of Saturn. I'm going to share with you the archetypes of the Sun in Pisces, but also of Saturn in Pisces too. What does the conjunction mean? Also, if we look at the event chart for when this exactly happens, ironically, it is in House 10, which is what Saturn rules through its guidance of the sign of Capricorn. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. Thank you for joining me. If you're new here, it's great to have your company. If you're a returning visitor, all your views and interactions are truly appreciated. If you'd like to talk to me one-to-one, I am a consulting astrologer. Please see my testimonials below. You can also have a video reading, or if you'd like to take advantage of my unique package offer, you can get 30% off and get your life roadmap report, the most serially important document any of us can ever read. It's our blueprint of what we were given when we were born, totally unique to each person. Then you'll also get your 12-month transit forecast too, so you can plan and anticipate some of the challenges coming up over the next year, but also when to make the smartest moves. Please see the link below for more. So the Saturn Cazimi. Cazimis are very frequent when it comes to Mercury. We have about 6 of them each year, but Saturn last was joined by the Sun in this embrace on the 28th of February 2024, and at that point it was at 9 degrees. On the screen now I'm sharing the event chart, and there are Saturn and the Sun together in that 10th house. It means the ascendant is right on the Earth point of Cancer, so the very first minutes of a very important cardinal sign, which is very much about stability, security and nurture. But the 10th house is where we connect to the world at large. Now, for many of us, that is through our career. But, of course, the 10th house can also be about goals and ambitions. But it can also be where we encounter people in positions of authority, or perhaps people who have a more traditional take on life. And it can also be where we have responsibilities. So the 10th house and Saturn being there suggests that this can be a particularly interesting Saturn Cazimi this year. Now, there is some offset for the restriction that Saturn can bring to the Sun, and that comes through Mars. Mars itself not in its best location, just like Saturn in Pisces. Mars is in its full in the sign of Cancer, but it does forge a trine to both the Sun and also Saturn. So that suggests that if we are structured in our approach, stay in touch with how we feel, the position of Mars, but also take action in a proportionate way, we can make this particular Saturn Cazimi work for us. But let's just think about the Sun in the sign of Pisces. So Pisces is the 12th zodiac sign, co-ruled, traditional Jupiter, modern of Neptune. And Neptune, of course, is just in residence still, coming to the end of its 164-year cycle. And it's on the anaretic degree, and it's very close to that position of the North Node. So this is a very karmic time. And of course, the sign of Pisces can be hugely idealistic. It can also be very caring and supportive and nurturing It's very much to do with our collective experience of all the other 11 zodiac signs, because it's the sign of culmination. But in the case of Saturn, it's a potentially much more karmic but weighty in influence, because Saturn likes structures. Pisces can resist them. It's a sign that likes a degree of infinity. It's a mutable sign. It doesn't really like being boxed in too much. And if it does have too much pressure to conform, that can be an issue. So that could be a potential downside with this particular Cazimi. But it's also important, if we're giving or helping or assisting situations, that it's done proportionately. And in a way, Saturn is reminding us that we can't have an overload of giving if we're pouring from an empty jar. So whatever our situation is, whether it's looking out for elderly relatives, whether it's looking out for youngsters, whether it is to do with our professional demands, or whether it is to do with anything to do with property, the 10th house, very much to do with physical structures, remember, there is a balance to be gained. And if something is too much of an onerous responsibility, too much of a weight around our shoulders, Saturn is asking us to review this. So this is an opportunity to have a serious think about all those themes and set our intentions in as realistic way as possible, because that's what Saturn asks us to do. And for some people, if you work in an organisation which is very top down, very hierarchical, but you are more of a natural bohemian, this aspect could really make you much more conscious of a need to break free and do something, or join another group of people which fits that part of you which is more to do with passion rather than function. It's a very functional aspect, this, to be honest. But we could also encounter someone who puts some demands on us, and those demands may not seem very fair. So for example, if we are trying to do something that's maybe a little bit more thoughtful or progressive, we could encounter someone with a much more conservative mindset. And funnily enough, that's what seems to be going on in the world at large. There does seem to be a recall towards more authoritative postures in terms of dealing with people's rights, liberties and freedoms. But this can also be a time when our physical vitality can be lower. The sign of Pisces really encourages us to rest, to recuperate, to reflect, to decide what we want to do once the sun returns with the spring equinox to the first sign of the zodiac of Aries, which is a time of new beginnings. And of course, later this month, we also have the solar eclipse in Aries as well, and Neptune moving into Aries, and therefore that more compassionate vibe, and some people would say it's been too much in that direction. There's been an overload of concern for people's rights and feelings, and it's a time to be much more masculine in our stances. That's not necessarily what I think, but I feel that that conversation is going on. And if all of what is drawing into your subconscious, which is very Piscean from the world at large, does seem a little bit oppressive, then this particular aspect can pulverize our passion for sure, and it can make us very aware of our emotional glass feeling half empty. So if you're in a job or a relationship, or you're dealing with people who tend to be very unyielding and want it on their terms, this might not be a particularly cheerful event. But it is an event to be realistic about where we are. And there is some outlets from this particular event, because on the screen now you can see that Venus and Mercury, which peaked in a conjunction themselves on Tuesday the 11th of March, although Venus is in retrograde, is in detriment in Aries, they are both in the 11th house. And even though there will be people who want to see that more traditional approach to situations, there will be others who want to push back and stay in touch, network, collaborate, cooperate in some kind of way in order to deal with what they see as rather oppressive tactics or approaches. Also, just to say on the event, the ascendant, which is essentially the personality of this event, which is essentially sensitive, is in a quincunx with Pluto. Pluto is having a huge radical effect on all of us. I remember some years ago, I think it was around about the end of 2022, I did read one well-known astrologer talking about how Pluto in Aquarius was going to take out Putin, take out Xi Jinping, and I have to say I was a little surprised at that comment. Since then we've seen a tightening up of the Chinese dominance of Hong Kong, and the civil liberties of the people who initially protested there have been completely extinguished. And one of the reasons for this is that Pluto in Aquarius can be a rather dystopian influence because it's so detached, it can be quite cold, and therefore some of the things that we've seen in terms of public services being potentially stripped down or dismantled, that's not necessarily for the good of person-kind, it's to suit a particular dogma or agenda. And of course Pluto is very much about power. Now, once Neptune moves into Aries at the end of March, we are going to see Neptune and Pluto start to align, and once Uranus comes into the mix as well, that golden triangle that forges along with Saturn from the 26th of May is potentially going to see some changes of direction that don't seem very likely at the moment. And my prediction is we are going to see a switchback, a much greater consciousness of how we're all connected, and some of the power plays that are taking place at the moment, particularly through digital technologies, AI, robotics, automation. There isn't necessarily going to be a universal acceptance of some of the policies that are being rolled out at the present time. But on this particular Saturn Cazimi, it really does give us all food for thought. The sign of Pisces can be definitely about looking out for those who are less fortunate, especially things like mental health care services. And if we dismantle support, what it does ultimately is pushes more cost into the system later down the track, when in some ways society breaks down. We've seen it in Britain over the last 25-30 years. It's not always a good thing to strip down investment, even if it seems like a popular policy with lots of people at that time. So I think that this is a really key moment for us all collectively in how we manage emotional, mental and spiritual well-being. But also Saturn also reminds us that where things have gone too much towards a kind of empathy overload, there is due a reset. And as ever, as I'm always saying, probably with my Libran ascendant, what we need is balance, not polarities. Polarities just cause strife. We need to accept that things will never be perfect for us all, and we need to try to find the best set of ways of coalescing around some central ways of achieving things. So that's my take on the Saturn Cazimi, and certainly if you are unhappy in a relationship with a parent, a boss, someone who works for you, you have a business which is been struggling, this can be a point of deep pausing, but it can also be that point where a greater sense of realism kicks in, exactly of where we are all. Thank you for joining me. Please do check out my new website at www.patrickarundell.com. It's got loads of fantastic goodies there to share with you, and it's really coming together now after its launch of about 3 weeks ago.